So Larry, thank you for joining us. We have our talk is titled "The Macro Impact of AI," which is like the $600 million question that everyone wants answered. So let's kick it off. I was reading a blog post and an op-ed that you wrote in the Washington Post in 2017 after Steve Mnuchin had made some comments about how far away AI was from affecting American jobs. And you took issue with that. You said AI is much closer to affecting our economy and jobs here in the United States. So where are we now? What is the landscape?
He said it was going to matter a century from now. I thought that was off by a factor of 100 or so, and I guess I didn't think it was his most inaccurate statement of that week. Look, I think automation and technology have been affecting our economy forever. People talk about this like it's all something that's coming in the future. In 1969, 4%, between 4 and 5% of American men between the ages of 25 and 54 were not working. Today, about 14% of American men between the ages of 25 and 54 are not working, almost 3 times as many, even though we're at a business cycle peak. There are many reasons for that, but an important part of it is that technology has been able to substitute for the kinds of work that many of them do, making the rewards to them for working much less and causing many more people to choose not to work. Anyone who believes that there's some law of economics that says that whatever happens with technology, there will always be good work for anyone, should contemplate the situation of horses. A horse today is just as strong, healthy, and productive as a horse was in 1900. But the economy is only able to support 10% as many horses today as it was in 1900 because there have been technological developments that reduce the productivity of the kinds of work that horses can do. Fortunately, we have child labor laws and we have expectations that everybody be in school and so forth. But even if we didn't, there were valuable things in the economy that a 13-year-old could do 150 years ago that someone older couldn't do in terms of taking advantage of small hands and the like. There is no longer any economic value to that. So we need to understand that there's no axiom of life that if we just let the market rip and technology develop, it's automatically going to assure that there are good jobs with reasonably distributed rewards for everyone.
So does that mean you see that AI is going to be a destroyer of jobs as opposed to what some argue would be a creator of new kinds of jobs as skills change?
Look, I think that it's almost always a good idea when you see anything new to try to look for relevant experiences. And over a century, between the latter part of the mid-latter part of the 19th century and the mid-latter part of the 20th century, we went from a world where half the people worked on farms to a world where almost nobody worked on farms. So that's half the people having their jobs destroyed and it no longer being productive for them to live where they were. That is a seismic change. And so this is not completely without precedent. Now, how should one interpret that broad experience? And there are two narratives that people tell, and they both have some validity, but they're both true. One is, look, isn't it fantastic? Half the jobs got destroyed, new jobs got created. People ended up in cities. They lived twice as long as they did in 1870. They all go to school. We have television sets. It has worked out fantastically, even though there was a lot of job destruction. That's one narrative. Another narrative is wrenching social change, wrenched societies, contributed to there being 2 world wars and a Great Depression. And the only way we got to a happy world that accommodated all of this change was with universal public education, was with the substantial growth of government, was with major public investments in infrastructure, was with the establishment of Social Security and healthcare programs, and a vast set of efforts. And so, yes, it worked out okay in the end, but there were a ton of difficulties in the transition, and success required not just being optimistic and letting the market rip. It required ambitious and aggressive public policy. And that's the vision that I would have. Ultimately, it's got every potential to be for the best. Even if it's managed well, there will be difficulties in the transition, and it surely requires aggressive public policy management. That would be the posture that I would take.
Do you see those efforts happening now? I mean, another way to ask this is the Trump administration doing enough around AI policy? We know that they issued an executive order in the last couple of weeks around AI, but it was pretty short on details.
Well, let me first say,
yeah.
I don't think it wasn't mostly about agricultural adjustment policy, and it wasn't even mostly about manufacturing policy with which we met the challenge of the previous transition. It was about education policy, it was about social insurance policy, it was about infrastructure policy, it was about the formation of a serious tax system, it was about urban policy. So it's just as war's too important to leave to generals, it's exactly wrong to think that dealing with the changes brought about by AI is mostly about something called AI policy rather than broader policies. We are doing roughly everything wrong.
Okay.
We are scapegoating, the US steel industry has about 1/5 as many people working in it as the US manicure industry. And we are blaming the problems of the US economy on unfair competition with the US steel industry. That's not 1% of what is behind our problems. Our approach seems to be blame other countries first for a set of global trends that are causing distress and disillusion elsewhere. So there is no solution to this problem in launching 1 trade war or 3 trade wars or threatening to launch trade wars. It is not a problem that is basically about the launch of trade wars, and that is the principal public policy that we are pursuing. There is no meaningful initiative underway with respect to educating the next generation. There is no meaningful initiative underway with respect to a national infrastructure that is crumbling. There is no meaningful initiative underway with respect to our scientific and R&D infrastructure. There is no meaningful initiative underway with respect to writing a set of rules of commerce for social networks and technology. There is a tax cutting for the top 2% of the population, and flailing trade wars threatened against almost everybody. Those constitute the economic policy of the United States of America, and no, that is not designed or remotely plausible as a strategy for addressing these challenges. I mean, the terms in which we should be thinking are the terms of what was done after the Second World War, when you saw a commitment to building a national infrastructure, when you saw a commitment to much more extension of higher education, when you saw a set of institutions created to assure federal scientific leadership. That's the level at which we should be thinking, not small bore rifle shot $80 million programs, and not pitting one group against another group or blaming foreigners.
Are there any conversations like what you described underway? And if so, where can we expect to see that sort of leadership?
I think I think that I don't mean to blow smoke, but part of the reason why ventures like the conference you're sponsoring are valuable endeavors is that they get people thinking, they get people talking, and these things ultimately bubble up. And then when the right political window of opportunity opens, very big things happen. Look, I've said a bunch of sort of negative things, but I think it's also important to say that I spend a lot of my time traveling, and if I had to play the hand of one country in the world right now, it would be the hand of the United States, with all of our challenges and problems. We do not have the kind of toxic agedness that Europe has. We are not riding a set of changes that may ultimately prove unmanageable in the way that China is. The great strength, it seems to me, of the United States is its capacity for self-denying prophecy. Americans are always predicting doom. There was going to be, the Cold War was over and Japan had won in 1990. There was a malaise, a crisis of the national spirit, said Jimmy Carter. Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon felt that we had to accommodate to a changing balance of forces in Russia's favor. John Kennedy believed on the day he died that Russia would surpass the United States economically within the next 20 years. And I can go back through examples. Patrick Henry said that the spirit of the revolution had been lost in 1792, just 5 years after the Constitutional Convention. And what has historically been our strength as a country is that we become very alarmed, and that our alarm, we flail about. And Churchill sort of got it right when he said the United States always does the right thing, but only after exhausting the alternatives. And we sort of flail about, and then we do the right thing, and others watch, and the world, some steps forward and fewer steps backward, makes progress. So I think that you have immense opportunity here created by artificial intelligence to cause people to be smarter and wiser than they've ever been, to cause people to live longer, healthier lives than they ever have, to relieve people of tedious, painful, boring work. And so there's huge positive opportunity in it. But if we suppose that it will all just happen automatically without anybody making any plans or policies, and that we can just move fast and break things and it'll all be okay, we will break a lot of things. But if we suppose that somehow it's better to turn the clock back, that it's somehow better for people to sit and type letters rather than be able to produce them on a word processor, that it's somehow better for things to be constructed with men pulling their shoulders out, lifting things, rather than with technology that eases the burden, that would be a huge mistake. So the challenge is to move forward, but to move forward wisely. And my fear is that we don't have enough voices who, in one way or another, are in the space I just described, and that instead we have voices saying that we should just wall off the future and try to enjoy the past. And we have voices more out here saying we should just let it all rip, and if we have to buy people off, we should buy them off with the universal basic income, and that'll keep them quiet, and it'll all be okay, and we can do our technologies. And I don't think either of those. And then we have views saying, well, you know, we just need to blame somebody else, and if we just blame the right people and we're angry enough about them, then it'll all get better. None of those three views seems to be the right view. So yeah, it's a moment with a lot of threats, but with staggering opportunity.
So we'll take questions from the audience in just a moment, but one last question from me about this then. So how much of this is on the radar already of the candidates for 2020? Are you starting to hear from any of them about any of what you have just described and what you're thinking about?
I think there are inklings of this that are coming through in things that a number of people are saying. I don't myself think that a jihad against the wealthy is an especially effective economic strategy for addressing these concerns, even if more progressive taxation is something that would be desirable. But I think people who are thinking about the restructuring of our healthcare system, or thinking about something that is productive, people who are thinking about a substantial renewal of our country's infrastructure, are thinking about, especially with an awareness of environmental issues, are thinking about something that is very important and constructive. You know, I think that one of the very important questions is going to be how the rise in American concern about China plays out over the next few years in our political process. If it leads to a renewal of energy around American renewal, like Russia galvanized the interstate highway system, galvanized the foundation of the NSF, galvanized our putting a man on the moon, then I think it can be very constructive. If the energy is all turned into trying to tear China down, I think that will be much less constructive and could, as it kind of created a self-fulfilling prophecy of conflict, be quite catastrophic.
Questions from the audience? Right here in the front.
So you were talking about the transition between the agricultural and the industrial revolution, the shift, and you said that there were a number of very difficult things that happened. We forget that, and we just look at the results. Everyone is more richer, better. I mean, they live longer and so on. And you dismiss universal basic income as a transitional answer to the shift from where we are to the technological unemployment challenges. Could you elaborate a little more about that?
The question is, why am I negative on universal basic income? So one possibility is that I just lack imagination and that I'm wrong. And I always ask myself when I'm launch into an explanation of why something is a bad idea, that maybe if somebody had asked me about Social Security in 1933, I would have explained about all the disincentive effects and been worried. So I'm open to the possibility that I'm wrong. That said, I think there are two big things you have to think about with universal basic income. One is just the sheer cost. How big should the universal basic income be? Well, $10,000 per person doesn't seem like an immense number. $10,000 per person means $3.3 trillion for the United States. To finance that, you'd have to double every tax we collect, every tax the federal government collects. Just doesn't feel to me like doubling all the taxes, sending the top income tax rate to 90%, before you get to state taxes, just doesn't feel to me like that's going to happen. And doesn't feel like it would be such a great thing if it did happen. You can say, we'll do a smaller universal basic income, but if you had a $3,000 universal basic income, it would only cost $1 trillion a year, and it would only be a $3,000 income on which nobody could live. So I think the first problem with it is just the sheer immensity of the cost. I think the second problem is I don't think it embodies the right values. Everything I know of the human experience, and I'm really stepping out of economics now, tells me that people derive satisfaction from vocation. And they derive satisfaction from working. And that a society that is designed to pay a large number of people for not working is going to be a very unhappy society. We can make visions, and Keynes had a vision of life, a century, economic possibilities for our grandchildren. He wrote an essay in 1930 about the world in 2030. And he envisioned a world where people were only working 15 hours a day and spending a lot of time going to conferences like this and listening to concerts and writing music and developing their skills as potters and painters and whatnot. The evidence is overwhelming that people who are not working and who are not taking care of children or taking care of someone are drinking beer, watching television, and not being unhappy. With the slight update on that, which is playing video games. But the evidence is that they are not happy, they are not satisfied, they are not healthy. And so I don't think of universal basic income, which is paying people not to work, as the right thing. I think of it in a different way. I think that I look at our society, and there is vast amounts of work to be done. There are millions of children who don't have the opportunity to play a game or a sport after school. There are millions of aged people who are lonely and who have no human contact. There are tens of thousands of school buildings across the United States with paint chipping off the walls. And so there's plenty of work that needs to be done. It may be that not all that work can be supported by a conventional for-profit business model in an effective way, and that we're going to need to find alternative models, perhaps alternative models involving the public sector, for supporting that work. But I would much rather think about how to provide employment opportunity for people who don't have employment opportunity, doing the vitally important work of our society, than I would writing people off by giving them checks. I think it's better for the people. I think it's better for the work they're able to contribute, and I think it's healthier for the unity of the society.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you, Larry, for joining us.
Thank you.
We are going to go to a coffee break now.